Greetings, greenhouse people, and welcome to another installment of Tech on Demand, where our goal is always to bring you tips, tricks, and information to select and produce your best crops ever. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and I'm happy to be joined by who I consider an absolute legend in the game of horticulture. Most of you probably recognize his name, especially if you've ever had an insect or mite pest in your greenhouse and then looked online for research-based solutions, or if you've read past articles in Grower Talks, attended any of many sessions at trade shows and events. My guest has been educating our industry about plant protection, biological controls, plant-insect interactions, ecology, pesticides, and much more for more than 25 years. That's why I called on him to discuss the topic for this episode, which is broad mites. My guest is Dr. Raymond Cloyd from Kansas State University. Dr. Cloyd, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Bill, for inviting me to join you.
For sure. There's no one I would rather have talk about this exciting topic of broad mites.
Yes.
It is an important topic.
Yes, and important.
But before we get started with broad mites specifically, I'm kind of interested in the big picture of what pests you think that you've been dealing with or growers have been dealing with more and more lately. I'm thinking maybe the past 3 to 5 years. We have common insect pests, but what's rising to the top or becoming more of an issue than in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bill. And I think from a perspective wise, we have our general common insect pests, mite pests, two-spot spider mite, western flower thrips, and other thrips and mites, whiteflies and aphis, fungus gnat, shore flies. But the two that I think stand out within the last 5 years is broad mite, which is our topic today, and the other was mealybugs. Mealybugs are becoming more and more of a pest, and the reason for that is several-fold. Number one is that there are not many biologicals available for mealybugs. In this case, citrus mealybug. Systemics don't work as drenches in our research. They have a very cryptic behavior, and once they develop that waxy white hydrophobic covering, it's very difficult to kill them with contact insecticides. And so there are a number of factors related to their biology and their behavior that make them very difficult. I think, like I shared to you before, last year in our biological control for whiteflies weren't the issue, it was mealybug.
What are the main crops that you're seeing mealybugs go after? Poinsettias for sure. But
well, they're very prolificous. I mean, they get on coleus is one. They get on a wide diversity of ornamentals. Chrysanthemum. We had severe infestations in our chrysanthemum crop last year. That get on vegetables. They get on herbs, rosemary, lavender. A wide diversity of crops. And there's information in my extension publication on mealybugs, Bill. I discuss the prevalent or the susceptible crops that you might find mealybugs on.
Okay, cool. I will look for that. I'll put that in the show notes since we've mentioned it, and maybe we can do a future podcast digging into mealybugs specifically.
I think it'd be a good topic.
Sounds like it. If those are if broad mites and mealybugs are becoming more of a concern, we'll talk about broad mites now, and maybe we'll circle back on mealybugs. Let's dig into broad mites a little bit. And I did pick this pest as one that for you and I to discuss because most of the technical folks at breeding companies that I've been talking to lately have brought up broad mites as a major concern and something they're seeing more and more questions on. Oh, and it's been requested by listeners and readers as well. So it's coming from all different angles of the industry. Why don't we talk a little bit about, we'll set the stage by some of the crops that broad mites are most common on, or that you see most of the damage or calls from growers, and the times of year when you hear most from growers dealing with broad mites. I think that'll help set the stage.
Here's a list, Bill, for you from my extension publication. Let's start with begonia, chrysanthemum, cucumber, cyclamen, dahlia, delphinium, eggplant, English ivy, exocum, fuchsia, impatiens, and New Guinea impatiens, pepper, snapdragon, strawberry, tomato, and zinnia. And if you look back at history, the one crop that is highly susceptible is Gerber daisies. Mm-hmm. I have a 1939 publication that discusses broad and cyclamen on Gerber daisy. So it's been around for a long time, and so very prolificous, a wide variety of plants, and some out there that I know they feed on salvia. I've seen them. So that is not an exhaustive list, but there's probably more that they feed upon.
For sure. So that covers like A to Z and across multiple different seasons as well.
Right. Broad mites, remember that broad mites are very different. Two-spotted spider mite is they like it cooler and higher humidity. So they're not going to be found in the summertime when you have higher temperatures in the 80s and you have low relative humidities. That's for two-spotted spider mite. But broad mite and cyclone mite, they like it 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and about 70 to 80 degrees relative humidity.
Okay.
So really from about May through probably the end of fall is potential for broad mite infestations.
And also a time when there's a lot of crops growing, and then we're moving into fall crops as well. So
yes, when you got a polyculture, there's a higher probability of having to deal with broad mites.
It sounds like everybody needs to have this on their radar. A lot of times when you talk about insect pests and mite pests, you start with an explanation of that pest itself. And I do think that helps, or that'll help our listeners get more of a sense of broad mites and what to look for with that pest. Why don't you give us a discussion about broad mites as a species?
Okay. Well, look, I think we can start from the beginning is why are broad mites a problem? Number one. And I have about 4 hypotheses I'll go through quickly. Number one is with the globalization of movement of plant material from one country to the next, there's always the risk of bringing in a pest problem such as broad mite. Number two is the selection of plants of breeding that has removed the natural tolerance resistance to some of these plants, consequently making them more susceptible to potentially broad mite infestations. And we know that occurs in many instances when you do the breeding for flower color, flower longevity, leaf variegation, that for gene theory, you're going to add something, but you got to remove another component of the genome. The other one is just the misdiagnosis. I mean, people don't, because broad mite damage resembles a nutritional deficiency, a virus, or even a herbicide drift. Producers may have been misdiagnosing it over the years as something else. And I'll give an example of this after I finish the fourth one, which is that prior to the introduction of the neonicotinoids in 1992, with the introduction of imidacloprid, producers were spraying broad spectrum materials, whether you go back to Temic and Oxymel, Vidate, pyrethroids. Well, those had activity on mites. I mean, okay. and even if you were targeting thrips, inadvertently, you were probably going to kill any broad mite and cyclone mite that were there. Well, the neonicotinoids don't have activity on mites. So when you relieve the pressure from a material that allows these populations to build up, and consequently, they become more and more a problem. And many of these materials are not even registered for vegetables or herbs, right, which might be another concern overall. But again, the misdiagnosis, I remember going to a producer, walking through the greenhouse, seeing some salvia with some curled leaves in a flat, asking him, what's wrong with these? And he said, well, they're probably lacking water. And they were a little dry, but I said, can I take them back with me? And I looked in the microscope, and they were just, they were infested with broad mites. I see the eggs, which have bumps on them, nymphs and the adults, the nymphs and larvae. So again, it's a diagnostic issue. They're not used to seeing something like that. And now that they're aware that broad mites can cause this, now they're sort of somewhat thinking in the back of their mind, yeah, maybe this could be broad. Yeah. So the life cycle is egg, 6-legged larva, 8-legged nymph, and then the adult. Generally, it takes about 2 weeks to complete that at about 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The cooler the temperature, the more delayed it is. The higher the temperature to about 80, it's about 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay. So pretty quick, I mean, in the grand scheme.
Right. It's about at the temperatures, that would be the average for most of our insect and mite pests, yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of they're small, right? You can't just see them with the naked eye or with a normal greenhouse hand lens, right?
No, they're microscopic. You actually need a microscope. That's what I need when I get samples. Even a 16x power hand lens struggles. So yeah, you need to. So when you, as a producer, if you suspect there may be an issue with damage, you got to send it off to a clinic or myself or an extension entomologist for verification. Because what we look first is for the eggs. The broad mite eggs have protrusions, bumps on them. Cyclone mite does not. But then you might also see some of the larvae or the adults or nymphs on the leaves simultaneously. And you don't want to spray the plant and then send it in, because all we'll see is pretty much, if we can, the eggs. We need to see some of the other life stages. Yeah.
And what are some of the symptoms on the plant itself?
Okay, so what broad mites are, we call them cell feeders. Okay. And during the process of feeding, they inject a toxic saliva, allows them to feed easily. And that toxic saliva causes interacts with plants. And so some of the classic damage is you see leaves curling under, you see the leaves kind of firm, brittle. On Gerber daisy, the new growth is purplish. You see leaf distortion. Some of the damage does resemble a phenoxy herbicide drift, and also some nutrient deficiencies or excesses such as manganese or boron. So that is why it's critical to have them sent off to a lab to verify if broad mites are the culprit or not. Yeah. So those are the major symptoms. And the thing to remember, Bill, is even if you spray and you kill the broad mites, that saliva is still in the plant, and plants will still exhibit damage symptoms even if you've killed after killing the broad mites.
Okay. And what if you send it off to a lab, it's identified as broad mites, what's the next step for a grower? Is it crop loss? Can you recover from it?
Well, that's the problem with broad mite is once you see the damage, it's done. And in most cases, you can't salvage it. So you want to get it verified, so then if you see it again, you know what it is. But what I recommend is if you see damage, dispose of those plants and then the ones around them about 6 inches, because although those plants are not showing any symptoms, they're more than likely going to have broad mites on them. Okay. And that's the problem with broad mites is it's after the fact. Once the damage is there, you can't really correct it.
This might be kind of a ignorant question, but I'm going to ask anyways. How do broad mites travel from one crop to another 6 inches away?
Well, that's an excellent question. So they can't fly.
Right.
So they are caught in wind currents like horizontal airflow fans, or people moving them, touching the plants. Or if the plants are adjacent, touching each other, they can move. The other way they can move is studies have shown they will get onto whitefly antennae and legs, and whiteflies can move them around. That's another aspect of broad mite management is be sure to manage your whiteflies, because they have been shown to be able to move the broad mites from one location to the next. And of course, whiteflies, adults can fly, and the males will actually move female broad mites from one portion of the plant to the next. We call this in entomology forestry, where you're hitching a ride on another organism or another life stage or sex is moving you around. But that's some of the mechanisms by which they can move around in a greenhouse.
Okay, that's interesting. I was wondering, that seems a long way to crawl, but if they're hitching a ride or getting caught in airflow, it makes a lot more sense. We've identified broad mites in our greenhouse this year. When I'm thinking about next year's crop and what I'm going to do, or even next season, this isn't just a spring pest. As you said, this is more of a summer, fall pest. What are some strategies that I can put in place in my greenhouse to mitigate the risk or prevent broad mites next year? Might be a little bit strong wording, but what's a plan? How would you work with the grower to put a plan in place? Are there products? Are there synthetic products or biologicals that have shown, I guess, some sort of effect on broad mites?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bill. And it's like anything else with a difficult insect or mite, the options are limited. So let's go through. So number one is sanitation. Yep. Keep things clean, remove weeds. They could serve maybe as an alternate host, although I have not seen data on that. Number one is determine what are the susceptible plants to broad mite. And then you focus your scouting efforts, or you're very scrutinizing about looking at plants on those types. Also, once the damage is evident, you want to remove those plants, that plant, and then the ones around it. Now, what about applying miticides? Well, if you know that your New Guinean patients are going to get broad mites from history this time of year, you can spray materials that are commercially available, and the ones we recommend are those we call have translaminar activity. And what that means is the material penetrates into the leaf tissues and resides in there for several days or weeks, depending on the active, the formulation, and the plant type. And that provides you some residual even after the material dries down, after the material is dissipated or desiccated. And so materials like Avid and Pylon, Savant, formerly Judo, and Contos have this translaminal activity. Also, as they move through the tissue, the more likelihood they come in contact with broad mites. Okay. Now, there are contact miticides like sand mite and Acari and others, but you have to get good coverage to contact them to kill them because there's no translaminar activity overall. But that's what's really involved is thorough coverage of all plant parts, using translaminar initially. You could use contact, but again, that thorough coverage is imperative. And again, like I mentioned, if you have high mortality, kill a substantial number of them, that doesn't mean the damage will not be expressed because the saliva is still in the tissue, and it's going to cause the distortion and some of the symptomologies that you and I talked about. That's really what's involved. Biological, there have been some studies showing certain predatory mites. Neosus cucumeris was one. I think Californicus was another out there. I think Amblyssia swirsky has been tested, but the problem is they have to kill a substantial number of the broad mites to prevent damage from occurring. And we know biological is not eradication like anything isn't. So it has to be done really early in the crop with high numbers. We call that, it's almost inundation. Inundate the area if you can, if it's not too costly to do that. Yeah. So those are some of the recommendations that are in publications. We discussed in articles and talks related to broad mite. But it's being very cognizant and being very astute of those plants that are highly susceptible. And I gave you just a listing of those that run the risk of getting broad mites. You also should find out where you're getting your plant material from. What are they doing to alleviate problems with broad mite, whether it be chemistry, whatever, and find out what they're doing to have a sort of a comfortable sense, psychological sense of, well, what you're getting is, quote, clean. And we know that's not the case. So, yeah.
And I guess along those lines, if broad mites can come in on your liners or on maybe on cuttings, but certainly on domestically produced liners, do you need to quarantine those young plants when they come into your greenhouse? I mean, you do that sometimes with diseases. I know that. Is there anything that you can gain by keeping them separate and scrutinizing them, or is it really, because they're microscopic, it's going to be tough and they're not going to show symptoms while, they're being held somewhere for a few days?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you know it's a highly susceptible crop, maybe leave it for a week to look for any abnormalities or typical symptoms of broad mite and try to get identified. You could spray them with a miticide, with a high volume spray to kill them if they're there. Yeah. But yeah, those are pretty much the options that are available once you get material in. Again, I would refer back to the company to see what are you doing to alleviate problems with broad mites so then I don't get them. And they're going to probably do the best job they can. But, if they're not spraying or doing anything, you might want to consider either getting material and spraying it or going to another supplier. Right.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess before we wrap up broad mites, because I have another pest to ask you about next. Yeah. Have we missed anything on broad mites? Is there anything else we need to discuss, or you think we've got that covered as much as we can in a podcast?
I think we've covered them. I just want to say the old treatment was hot water treatments, but those are like some dipping, like it's a snapshot. You take them out, then they're susceptible. So, and there were a lot of issues with that. So that's why it's probably not recommended. But let me, if I was to give the highlight of the day is figure out what crops are susceptible and then sort of scrutinize those throughout the growing season. So even if you do see some damage, you can remove that and hopefully alleviate the spread of the broad mites throughout the rest of the crop and not have some type of economic loss.
Yeah, so remove them at the first sign of damage, figure out if it is broad mites or if it's one of the herbicide damage or nutritional issue.
Or even environmental. I've gotten Guinea impatiens leaves in April that look like broad mite damage, but there's not, and it was related to cold temperatures. As you know, New Guineas don't tolerate cold temperatures in the spring. Right. So, yeah, but growers, producers don't know these. And so that's why we have these venues of diagnostic labs and myself and others that are there to help the producers to determine if it's broad mite causing the damage or not.
Okay, so remove it, send it in, then go from there. That makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I do have another pest to ask you about. It's one that we heard quite a bit about last year. It's not new, I'm sure, but it's something that's on a lot of growers' radars since poinsettia season is quickly approaching. I don't think it's what I would consider a common pest. You would know more about that than me, but Lewis mites. I know that some growers did deal with them last year. How about a kind of an abbreviated lesson on the pest in general, and then some guidance on how you would help a grower prepare for when poinsettia cuttings arrive and they just want to be sure to either avoid or deal with this potential pest?
Okay, that's a good point, Bill. Now, Lewis mite is not a ephemeral pest. That is, every year we have it. But Lewis mite is very similar to two-spotted spider mite. There are some morphological differences. They're smaller. They don't typically have the black spots on both sides of the abdomen as two-spotted spider mite does. Their life cycle is a little more extended. Takes longer than two-spotted spider mite. And also the damage looks very different. It looks more like a mineral or a nutrient deficiency. And, producers, when they're growing poinsettias, don't even think of spider mites. In this case, Lewis mite, they think it's, again, going back to broad mite, this resembles a nutritional deficiency. We need to deal with it, or a toxicity. And when the cause is the Lewis mite. The Lewis mite feeds similar to the two-spotted spider mite, typically is on the lower leaves initially and then moves up. The ways to deal with it are very similar to two-spotted spider mite. Miticides that are out there, floramite, many others that are out there can be used against the Lewis mite. Again, I would rotate to minimize the prospects of resistance. I don't think we know enough about Lewis mite and the potential for resistance, but if it's a typical mite, it's something you need to be concerned about. Biologicals, I'm not sure we delved into that overall. I guess it's because it's not a common pest. Last year, I know we had it, but it's been several years before it even popped up again.
Okay,
that's a problem. So I would recommend to the producers is what you use when you see damage is throw those plants away, and if you want to, spray the rest of the area with a common miticide to kill any Lewis mites that are on the other plants.
You've seen a lot of these pests over the years. You're definitely the expert. When you see something like Lewis mites in 1 year, is it less likely to see that pest the following year because folks have put practices in place to eliminate it because it was an issue the previous year, or is it something that gets worse from year to year?
That's an interesting question, Bill. And it's like I get the questions, are Japanese beetles going to be up on bagworms going to be a heavy pest in outdoors this year? And I really can't do that.
Okay.
I don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
If I did, I'd be giving advice for $1 million a minute. But anyway, the point is well taken. Is these sporadic pests, we call them, are occurring not every year, and that's why they're called sporadic.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess producers should have in the back of their mind that whenever they see plants not looking like they should get them sent to the diagnostic clinic as soon as possible to determine what is causing the problem. Is it an insect, a mite, or a disease, or other nutritional deficiency, something like that? So then they know what's going on as opposed to guessing.
Okay.
And I think that's probably the main advice I'd like to, not only for Lewis mite, for broad mite, is find out what it is.
Yeah.
Then you can take the necessary steps or procedures to deal with it effectively.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Before we wrap up, I already asked you if we missed anything on broad mites. No. I'm guessing we covered most of what needs to be discussed with Lewis mites. Any other pests you're seeing in high prevalence this spring? If folks are listening in real time, is there anything that they need to mention to their IPM manager? Hey, keep your eye out for this pest. Is there anything that you, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you got a lot of experience. Is there anything you would recommend growers just keep a extra alert out for this year?
Okay, so we're entering the bedding plant season where you're talking about polyculture, lots of different crops, ornamentals, vegetables, and herbs. Again, it's just, scouting and looking at the crop. We know aphids are are popping up in Calibrachoa baskets and other plants. Just be on the lookout, scout. Again, have a well-rounded, established scouting program, so then you're not dealing with outbreaks. The benefit of scouting, and I've given many talks about this, is early detection of the pest. And why that's important is because then you can, one, minimize potential future damage, but number two, you can look at what are my options for dealing with this problem.
Right.
And again, I equate it to like going down the road with blinders on. If you don't have a scouting program, you really don't know what is going on. So then you're more prone or susceptible to pest problems, whether it be insects, mites, or even pathogens, and even problems with crop culture, fertility, or environmental conditions. Yeah, so you either hire somebody to do that or have some in-house who's devoted to it. But I can't stress enough how important it is to detect early on in production any problems before they really reach outbreak proportions.
Appreciate that. I think that's good advice for every listener we have who are producing plants. Prevent those outbreaks. Early detection is definitely the key. Well, Dr. Cloyd, I appreciate it. This has been a great discussion. I'm sure the listeners will agree. Your approach is always, equal parts scientific and real world. I'm sure we could have dug into broad mites even deeper in terms of their structure, their morphology, but to give growers some information to stay ahead of that and maybe identify them early on so they're not taking major losses, it was the goal. And I appreciate your willingness to join me. I know that when we talked in Kansas a few weeks ago, I kind of cornered you and asked you to do this, and you're super willing to do it, which I appreciate. If folks want to learn more about broad mites or see some of the other resources that you put together, extension publications, where's the best place to find those?
I think if you get on the Kansas State University entomology website, I have my own website, but also we have a common one. You can type in my name or find it, and I've got all my extension publications, all my articles, and all relevant information there that you can download. I mean, all the extension publications. In fact, as a matter of fact, all my extension publications related to greenhouse pests, I have collated into one publication. If you email me, it's a PDF. I can send that to you, and it's got all of them. So I also did the biologicals that I've written about. So I've taken all my extension publications, collated them in one document, so it's easier for people to have one document as opposed to multiple pieces of paper in their hand. Yeah, so I think that's probably the best way to get in touch with me, Bill, and also access some of the publications that I've developed over the years.
Excellent. I will put links to that in the show notes, and through that website you can get in touch with Dr. Cloyd and get as much information as you need. And I'm sure that you will also see more articles from Dr. Cloyd in Grower Talks coming up soon, one of our favorite authors. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Bill, I look forward to doing our future podcast.
Definitely. And next up, we will talk poinsettias, get folks prepared for that season, which is coming. But for now, we'll let them get back to work in the greenhouse because it's heavy spring shipping season.
It is. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Yep. Take care.